Winter fell upon Hafnarfjord, haven of the fjord, with a vengeful malice. Arriving not with the soft, peaceful blanket of snow, but with a malignant cold that clawed at the flesh. Jarl Kale Stormblade, his thick beard dusted with rime, stood on the docks gazing out at the ink-black fjord. 3 fishing ships had vanished in the past week without so much as a squall to blame. The customary rage of Aegir, the sea god, seemed to have been replaced by a deadly profound silence. That silence shattered when a large warship, bearing no banners, drifted listlessly onto the northern shoals. Kale took 10 of his fiercest warriors to investigate. The vessel, though structurally sound, held a scene of pure horror. The entire crew had been turned into icy effigies. They were dead in poses of terror or mid-swing, their bodies neither decomposed nor decayed. Every fiber of muscle, every strand of hair, was encased in a thin, translucent layer of frost, emanating a cold so intense it bit the skin even from a distance. Yulf, speak loudly. This is not the work of the living. While examining the wreckage, Kale noticed an unmistakable sign on shore. A massive cairn of rune-carved stones had been violently shifted. This was the ancient burial place reserved for the cursed. Upon returning, the village elders, shaking with fear, confirmed the terrifying truth. The tomb of Grendel's Bane had been breached. He was a jarl from 1,000 years past, punished by the gods for his monstrous cruelty, entombed beneath magic and stone so his spirit could never plague Midgard again. That very night the crisis struck, not from the open sea but from the cursed longship itself. With the horrifying sound of grating bone and tearing flesh, the low-level Draugr rose. They were not the slow, shambling dead of myth. They were swift, and their presence caused the very earth beneath their feet to freeze. The air around them was frigid, draining the Viking warriors' strength and making their steel brittle. The battle was chaotic. Kyle, wielding his familiar axe, Stormcleaver, led the charge. He hacked and cleaved, but every wound he inflicted upon the Draugr instantly sealed itself with ice, making it maddeningly difficult to put them down. Kael roar, "Fight for Valhalla! Do not let the cold consume your souls!" Finally, Kyle decapitated the last Draugr, and the freezing pressure instantly lifted. Kael, breathless, looked up toward the hill behind the village where the ruined tomb lay. Standing there, 3 times the height of any man he had ever seen, was a colossal figure, covered in glittering cold steel frost. The shape was indistinct, yet its eyes glowed with an ancient, icy blue malevolence. Grendel's Bane had returned. The specter stood for a moment, assessing the small village, before dissolving back into the swirling cold night. Kale gripped his axe, a grim certainty settling in his heart. This was merely the prelude to the true storm. Kyle stood before the charred remains of the longship and the graves of the fallen, the lingering chill of the Draugr sinking into his bones. His axe, Stormcleaver, was dull against the unnatural ice of the risen dead. He knew then, conventional strength would not defeat Grendel's Bane. This was a battle for the gods, but since the gods were silent, Kale would seek their tools. His mission was clear: find Icy Fang, the legendary sword rumored to have been forged in the breath of a frost giant and capable of piercing the deepest ice. He gathered his companions. Among them was Ulf, a massive but quiet warrior, and Brynja, a weathered seer. Setha, who read the fates not in the runes of the earth but in the frost patterns on stone. Her presence was essential, for only she could guide them to the sword's resting place, high in the perilous mountains of the Silent Mist. The journey was a brutal ascent into the heart of the northern cold. The trail was treacherous, leading them first into a forest where ancient curses had bound the trees into frozen skeletal shapes. Here, the challenge was subtle: magical traps woven into the snow, illusions of warmth and false paths. Brynja, consulting the whispers of the wind, guided them past the treacherous illusions. As they climbed higher, the air grew thin and the true enemies appeared. These were not the common Draugr of the shore, but guard Draugr, bound to protect the ancient relics. They were larger, their movements strangely fluid despite their frozen state, and they carried shields of shimmering, impossible ice. The quest culminated deep within a vast, echoing ice cave, lit only by the faint blue glow filtering from the glacial ceiling. Kale found the sword's supposed resting place guarded by a solitary, immense Draugr. This creature was encased in thick, constantly reforming ice armor. It roared, and the very ground beneath them froze instantly, forcing Kale and Ulf to scramble for footing. Kale led the combat. Ulf distracted the guard Draugr with shield bashes while Kale circled. He realized the Draugr was drawing the surrounding cold to reinforce itself. Kale abandoned brute force, relying on his speed, dodging the colossal freezing blows. Until he spotted a moment of weakness, a fracture in the armor near the creature's neck after a particularly wild swing. With a cry to Odin, Kyle plunged Stormcleaver deep into the gap. The Draugr Hovi shrieked, its icy armor exploding into 1,000 shards. Before collapsing into a mound of dust and snow. In the center of the cavern, lying on an altar of solid permafrost, was the prize. It was the legendary Icy Fang. The blade was long, slender, and unnaturally clear, almost invisible against the ice. Kyle reached for it. The moment his bare hand wrapped around the leather-bound hilt, a searing, painful cold shot up his arm, making his blood feel like frozen oil. Kale gritted his teeth, his iron will pushing back the paralyzing cold. He drew the sword. Though the chill threatened to shatter his very bones, he held it firm, knowing its frigid essence was the only power that could match the frost of Grendel's bane. Kale returned to Hafnarjord, not a conqueror, but a man carrying a chilling weapon. The Icy Fang hummed with silent power, a stark blue contrast to the gray landscape. The Draugr Lord, Grendel's bane, had been testing the village's defenses, sending probes of low-level undead to gauge Kyle's strength. Kyle decided to end the games. With Ulf and Brynja positioned to the rear, he ventured out to the ruined cairn, challenging the monstrosity directly. The air temperature dropped instantly, plunging to a murderous chill that even Kale, protected by the Icy Fang's aura, could barely withstand. The ground split open, and Grendel's bane emerged, not as the indistinct giant of the previous night, but as a towering skeletal figure clad in ancient ruined armor. Draugr's bane. You bring the frost to the Master of Ice. A fool's bargain, little Viking. Kale met the challenge. He rushed forward, Icy Fang meeting the Draugr Lord's massive ice-coated greatsword. For the first time, Kale felt hope. Where Stormcleaver had merely scratched, the Icy Fang bit deep, splintering the Draugr's frozen armor and drawing forth a chilling, dark vapor. The Draugr Lord shrieked, a sound that was pure, cold malice, and recoiled, temporarily stunned. Before Kale could press his advantage, Grendel's bane unleashed a power far older and darker than the common curse. The Draugr Lord began to transform. The skeletal armor dissolved, replaced by thick matted fur and muscle that bulged with unnatural size. This was not just a Draugr. This was a Skotbera, a beast shaper, fused in life with the spirit of a frozen bear god. Grendel's bane, now the Frost Bear, stood 4 times Kyle's height, a monstrous amalgamation of rotting flesh, icy armor shards, and dense white fur. Kale realized the depth of his enemy. This beast was not merely undead, it was a walking curse that wielded the power of Jotunheim. Knowing he could not win this confrontation, Kyle executed a tactical retreat, the image of the Frostbear's immense clawed paws burning in his mind. He had the sword, but he still needed the strength. The sword needed blood sacrifice. Kale knew he couldn't face the Frostbear alone. He traveled to the neighboring Jarldoms, seeking the aid of his old allies. The other Jarls, however, greeted his urgent plea with suspicion and fear. Jarl Olaf. We fight men, Kale, not bear gods in the frozen flesh. This is madness. Kale remained steadfast, showing them the fractured ice from his first battle, and the ominous chill that now plagued Hafnarjord. Finally, the youngest and most ambitious Jarl, Rorisi, agreed, seeing a chance for glory and realizing the looming threat. Rorik gathered a small contingent of veteran shield maidens and seasoned huskarls, the strongest fighting force Kale could hope for. Back at Hafnarjord, Brynja prepared for the most crucial task, unlocking the full potential of the Icy Fang. The sword required a sacrifice of blood and iron, a final Viking ritual to bind the raw cold of the Icy Fang to Kale's own life force. Kale stood bare-chested against the cold, holding the sword point down into a basin carved from glacial ice. Brynja began the ancient incantation, her voice rising and falling, summoning the spirit of the frost giant that forged the blade. As the ritual peaked, Brynja nicked Kale's palm with a ritual dagger. Kale's blood, warm and vital, hit the icy basin. Instead of freezing, it began to flow into the Icy Fang's clear blade. The sword roared to life, its blue glow intensified, now layered with faint pulsing crimson veins. The icy fang was no longer merely a weapon. It was an extension of Kael's will. The Draugr Lord, meanwhile, had not been idle. It had moved its colossal force to the frozen Lake Scotty's mirror. The lake was a vast expanse of eternally frozen water, the perfect stage for a battle of titans. Kael looked upon his small band of allies, fewer than 100, facing an army of unfeeling monsters. Kael, we fight not for victory alone, but to keep our hearts warm, for Midgard and for Valhalla. With the fortified sword in hand and a loyal band at his back, Kael led the charge toward the frozen lake. The true storm was about to break. The morning was swallowed by a perpetual twilight as Kael and his allies crested the final ridge. Below them, on the vast pristine sheet of Lake Scotty's mirror, the Draugr army awaited. The Draugr were a silent tide of death, led by the colossal, terrifying figure of the Frost Bear. Kael raised the icy fang. Its combined blue and crimson light seemed to defy the cold, igniting a final fire in the hearts of his warriors. Kael, charge! For Midgard and the warmth of Valhalla. The clash was immediate and brutal. Viking steel met frozen bone, and the ice beneath their feet fractured into spiderweb patterns with every blow. Rorik's shield maidens, fighting with disciplined fury, focused on keeping the flanks protected, carving bloody paths through the Draugr ranks. Ulf, a battering ram of a man, stood beside Kael, his shield deflecting blows while Kael searched for the clear path to the great beast. The Draugr fought without pain or fear, but the icy fang's frigid aura was a silent weapon, slowing them and causing their icy armor to crumble faster. Kael finally reached his target. The Frost Bear roared, a sound that split the air and lunged with its massive frozen claws. This was the true terror, a monster that wielded the crushing weight of a giant and the paralyzing chill of 1,000 winters. Like Thor facing Jormungandr, Kael engaged the monster in a duel of pure strength and willpower. He darted around the beast's colossal form, seeking any gap in the dense fur and ice. The Frost Bear countered, exhaling a plume of frozen, deathly mist that turned the very air around Kael into razor shards of ice. Icy Fang glowed brighter, acting as a shield against the blizzard breath. The red veins on the blade pulsed faster, demanding payment in the Draugr's frozen essence. Kael knew he had one chance. He drew upon the strength of his blood sacrifice, channeling his life force directly into the Icy Fang. With a final roar, Kael leaped onto the beast's back, driving the Icy Fang deep into the joint where neck met shoulder, the weak point of the fusion. The Frost Bear released a monstrous, bone-jarring shriek. The cry was so potent it shattered the ice surface for a mile around. The great beast began to freeze from within. The blue light of the Icy Fang spread throughout its massive body, locking the monstrous form in eternal, unbreakable ice. Kael pulled the sword free, and the great bear monster crashed onto the ice, transforming into a colossal statue of pure, glittering sapphire blue ice. When the Draugr army saw their master frozen, they too instantly crumbled, turning into harmless piles of snow and dust. The cold lifted. Perched precariously on the shoulder of the thrashing, roaring behemoth, Kael knew he had only one chance. The Frost Bear twisted, aiming to rake him off with a reverse claw, but Kael was quicker. With a final, desperate surge of will, he plunged the Frost Thunder blade downward. The enchanted steel, singing with the divine light woven by Brynja, struck the small red pulsing fissure on the Draugr Lord's chest. The light of the Frost Thunder blade exploded, piercing the ancient curse that anchored Grendel's bane to the world. The massive half-bear head snapped back, releasing a final mournful shriek, a sound that was not malice, but sheer agonizing relief. The moment the curse broke, the colossal Frost Bear collapsed. The body did not fall, but began a rapid, irreversible decay. The glacier ice that made up its claws and armor crumbled to dust. The vast, decomposing flesh shriveled into ash, and the skeleton dissolved into a fine white powder, swallowed by the geysers of frigid water. Grendel's bane was gone. The effect was instantaneous and widespread. Across the lake, the hundreds of low-level Draugr that had plagued the Viking forces stopped dead. Their icy coatings cracked, their corrupted bodies crumbled, and the wind carried away their essence. The curse was lifted. The pervasive, malignant cold that had gripped the northern realms for weeks began to recede. The hostile ice on the Serpent's Coil began to melt and crack, revealing the dark, clear water beneath. The gray sky, heavy with doom, began to break, letting through the weak but undeniable light of the midday sun. Kael, bruised and frozen, was pulled from the water by Ulf, his silent warrior companion. Jarl Torvald, who had watched Kyl's suicidal charge, approached, his eyes wet with tears, not of grief, but of profound respect. The allied Jarls swore an eternal oath of loyalty to Kyle, recognizing him not just as a leader, but as the savior of their realms. Kull and the survivors returned home to a Hafnarfjord transformed. The blight was gone. Fires burned warm, and the threat of eternal winter had been driven back. He led a small procession back to the mountains of the Silent Mist. He oversaw the forging of a new cairn, Mansesda, and buried the Frost Thunderblade deep beneath it. The weapon's terrible, godlike power was too great for any mortal to keep. Kyle ordered a colossal runestone to be erected, carved not with the face of the beast, but with the images of all the allied Jarls standing together. The inscription read, "Here stood Kale. He did not ask the gods for strength, but forged it in his own soul. And by the unity of men, he conquered the Frost's wrath. Let the spirit of the North remember, we shall endure." For generations after, the story of Kyle Stormblade was told not merely as a tale of war, but as a saga of unity and indomitable will.